Sir Kannan Gopalakrishnan. He was working as a senior architect at Engineering Design Research Centre, L&T Construction, India's largest construction company. He's also worked on projects ranging from institutional buildings to international airports, apartment complexes to aircraft hangars. He's also attended 3 international conferences and 2 national conferences, and has also presented technical papers at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, and the MSRIT, Bangalore. He's also won the national championship at Archaman at the India's largest architecture quiz. Sir Kannan Gopalakrishnan currently runs a design firm, Habitat Design Studio, and he is also a visiting faculty at the renowned architecture schools in Tamil Nadu.
Welcome to UGC lecture series. This is AR 6006, Structure and Architecture. We are covering units 3 and 4, wherein we are looking at a series of case studies, and we are studying contemporary structural expression through case studies. This is lecture 17, and I hope you remember the previous lecture where we looked at an example of the famous Kansai International Airport Terminal. It is that airport terminal which is inside the sea, which is built on reclaimed land. So, I am sure you remember that famous building. So, with that in mind, we are going to look at one more really famous and very interesting case study in this episode, which is the Jean Marie Chibao Cultural Center. The Jean Marie Chibao Cultural Center is a very brilliant example of mixing a local traditional architecture and modern contemporary structural expression, and you will find this example very interesting on various levels. Without any further ado, we will just move into the case study. First look at the building. The building looks something like this. Wow, such a brilliant setting, set amidst the Pacific landscape, subtropical region of New Caledonia. This was a site that was given to Renzo Piano. It was a competition project. Look at the amazing site which was given to Renzo Piano. The site consists of a lot of trees, organic shaped islands, blue waters of the Pacific. Brilliant setting, if you ask me. Look at the response which Renzo Piano has made to the site and to the project. Jean Marie Chibao Cultural Center, which is situated on the narrow Tinu Peninsula, approximately 8 kilometers northeast of the historic center of Numia, the capital of New Caledonia. This celebrates vernacular Kanak culture which is present there. It was opened in June 1998 and was designed by famous Italian architect, Pritzker Prize Award winner Renzo Piano, and it was named after Jean Marie Chibao, who apparently had a vision of establishing a cultural center which blended the linguistic and artistic heritage of the Kanak people. Jean Marie Chibao was also the famous person who led, apart from other people, led the independence struggle of New Caledonia, and he was also the first president of the nation. So, when he was assassinated in 1989, this building was planned to be constructed in his memory and was completed in June 1998, and it was named after this famous personality. If you are wondering where New Caledonia is located on the South Pacific Ocean to the east of the Australian continent, this is the world map of the region. You can see the Asian, African and the Australian continents. New Caledonia is an island in the South Pacific Ocean right here, and Naumea is a city which is the capital of this New Caledonian country, and the city is somewhere here. The subtropical climate which New Caledonia enjoys is evident from the pictures that you have seen in the earlier slide. So, let us take a look at what are the features that the building sports. Kanak is the culture of New Caledonia. It was an ancient culture which existed before the imperial age. During the imperial age, the French settlers took over New Caledonia and they started imposing their cultures and their traditions into the New Caledonian state. The Kanak tradition was almost completely lost. So, that is why this famous building is required to bring back the Kanak building tradition and show us what Kanak people traditionally valued, and this building acts like a showcase of their tradition and values. Here, the building traditions which were followed by the Kanak people and the resources of modern international architecture was thoroughly blended by Ranjapiano. Formal curved axial layout, just 250 meters long on the top of the ridge. It has 10 large conical cases, they call it cases, which is actually looks like a pavilion. They are all of different dimensions. They are patterned on the traditional Kanak hut design. Each Kanak settlement has a series of houses with in the central axial layout, and at the edge of the axial layout is the grand hut, which is for the Kanak leader, the tribe leader or the group leader. So, this conical case or pavilion, which is patterned based on the Kanak traditional hut design. The entire buildings, all the 10 huts, 10 houses, cases, are surrounded by beautiful landscaping, which is also again inspired from traditional Kanak design building elements and landscaping elements, which is of great connect to the local people. This is another look at the building. You can see the beautiful Pacific Oceans and the islands which are formed by the nature, and you can see the dense vegetation on the islands expressing beautiful subtropical weather, and such a setting is almost a blessing for any architect, because nobody gets such a beautiful setting to construct a building. Very rarely architects get such commissions, and Ranjapiano has done it so beautifully with very minimal invasion of the nature. These are the 10 cases which I was talking about earlier. They are all of very different sizes. These cases are big, these are medium in size, and whereas these are pretty small compared to the bigger ones. Marie Claude Chibab, who is the widow of Jean Marie Chibab, and the current leader of the Agency for Development of Kanak Culture, which is called the ADCK. She says that we, the Kanaks, see it as a culmination of a long struggle for the recognition of our identity. On the French government's part, it is a powerful gesture of restitution, because the French government is the people who actually funded for this particular building. The building plan spread over an area of 8,550 square meters of the museum were conceived to incorporate the link between landscape and the built structure in the Kanak tradition. Let's take another look at the building. Let's take a look from the other side of the building. Here again we see islands, we see the same kind of setup. The reflection of the building on the water in front of it is in Greek styles, due to the consequence of new discoveries of Greek Roman architecture. Also, what happened was, certain Greek Roman architecture building concepts were recently discovered, and then they tried to decipher what they did, and they tried to install those same concepts inside their buildings. So, a part of the reason Sydney was made famous by the famous Sydney Opera House. This is designed by John Utzon. Bilbao was again made famous by the building which Frank Gehry designed, the Guggenheim Museum. The phenomenon by which this occurs is often dubbed as the Bilbao effect. We saw the Bilbao effect earlier in one of our presentations, in one of the earlier lectures. Bilbao effect is the transformative economic effect of any project on any city which the particular project is built on, in the very idea of putting that place on the world map, also to give that place an economic boom. For the city of Nomia, the Chibab Center was a blessing. It has been no less dramatic than that of any opera house or any museum of greater renown. Since the center's completion, New Caledonia has found itself an international architectural spotlight. Whether the New Caledonian government ever intended to bring so much attention to the island became largely irrelevant, because after they selected Piano as the winner of the Invite 20 international competition in 1991, everything was going to change for New Caledonia. Its objective was to solicit ideas for a center that would celebrate the Kanak architecture and culture native to New Caledonia, and in the process smooth over ethnic tensions that had been chronically deteriorating between the Kanak people and the island's other inhabitants. So, this ethnic tension was there, and to ease out this tension, this building was built so that to showcase to the world the famous culture and architecture and other traditions of the New Caledonian natives, the Canucks. Now, here in the backwaters of the Pacific Ocean, reflection of the sunlight, we see these golden orange color domes. So, the same cases which we talked about in the earlier slides. Look at how beautiful it looks. The reason why the building looks incomplete has a very, very deep meaning, which I will tell in the future slides. So, right now let us look at more of what Piano meant to do in this building. The planning aimed at a unique building which would be, as the architect suggested, to create a symbol, a cultural center devoted to Kanak civilization, the place that would represent them to the foreigners, a place that would pass on their memory to their grandchildren. Another aspect of the Kanak's building tradition was that it did not fit in with the concept of a permanent building. The Kanak people used to live in temporary type of buildings made with locally available materials, which needed to be replaced from time to time in the subtropical climate which they had. This building again, when it looks like a temporary building, when it looks like a temporary structure, it was there, it made a striking connect with the local people. This involved the local architecture. I mean, this involved the wood frame building built on earthen plinths with roof covered usually by thatch. The form of building also varied from island to island, which is generally round in plan and conical in the elevation. The Kanak people made houses in groups, with the headman's house at the end of an open public alley formed by other buildings clustered along on both sides. Trees lined these alleys with a shady central gathering. This same theme was adopted in the cultural center by Piano. Here you can have a closer look at the shells which are formed. You can see these shells which house different rooms of different sizes. An interpretative landscape path was conceived and implemented around each building. The series of vegetative cover avenues along the path that surrounded the building, but separated it from the lagoon. This concept of the landscape setting appealed to the local Kanak people when the center was inaugurated. According to a critic, it was very intelligent to use the landscape to introduce the building, because this is the way the Kanak people can understand any building. At the core of the project's purpose was a long, complex and often confrontational history between the Kanak people and the New Caledonia's European descended rulers. Because there are these two different kinds of people in New Caledonia. One is the local Kanak people, and other a set of people who had descended from European origins. So, these two people have a long, complex and unresolved confrontational history between the two people. There always tension that was growing on between. The island of Grande Terre, which was colonized by French settlers early in the 19th century, had endured almost 2 centuries of natural resource depletion, exploitation, cultural oppression, and long periods of enslavement. This led to the tension between the local people and the European descended people. Here is another closer look at the building. But in the late 20th century, the island underwent a protracted and varyingly bloody independence movement on behalf of the Kanak people, led in part. In the late 20th century, the island underwent a protracted and varyingly bloody independence movement on behalf of the Kanak people, led in part by Jean Marie Chibau, for whom the center is named, until his assassination in 1989. It was in this context that the project was conceived as a long overdue recognition to a marginalized culture and given funding by the French government. Politics aside, however, it is easy to understand what the jury saw in Piano's elegant design and how it became an object of esteemed recognition. Because, like I mentioned earlier in this lecture, this project is a invite only competition project in which Piano's design was selected due to certain qualities in the project, and because of that they selected to build this project. Here you can see the landscape which was designed based on the Kanak traditions, wherein you can see the sculpture taken from Kanak traditional values, people having spears in the hand, people having throwing spears with face masks and long wooden sculptures with the plantation trees and other things which represent the local climate, local vegetation. The building seems oddly incongruous with the local setting. Sensitively using traditional Kanak chiefs' houses as a starting point, the architects manipulated and deconstructed their form to create monumental sequence of rounded airy shells. 10 of such shells stretch along the hillside, varying in height from 20 to 28 meters, casting a commanding presence over the Pacific shoreline. Within and between them, a carefully choreographed procession of museum spaces takes visitors on a journey that weaves back and forth between intimate indoor enclosures and the surrounding island landscape. So, what Piano had done was, he had taken 10 of these cases and he has placed it side by side, and he takes the people in and around these cases, moving back and forth between indoor small intimate spaces to outdoor spaces with surrounding landscape. He takes them in and out, he weaves the whole path, and then he takes the people through the museum. This is one section of the museum where you can see how people go from the intimate spaces of the museum to the exterior of the museum, where people can express, where people can move around, where people can enjoy the landscape along with the museum. Like the Kanak architects before them, Piano's concept emphasizes the influence of site and environment as determinants of design and performance. The form of the shells negotiates a blend of traditional construction methods and a tapered dematerializing profile that beautifully plays off the texture of the surrounding trees. Exterior voids worked into the plan and fenestrations in the building envelopes physically open the project to the site and deepen the inhabitants' sense of place. Here, the way in which the building is half completed, the way in which the building is shaped in this matter, the form itself, Piano says that this represents the nearby trees and landscape elements, so that this is made to resemble those landscape elements. At the same time, he also makes sure that the physical opening is open in certain places, so that people can go out, enjoy the weather, look at the landscape, and then come back. So, the nature, landscape, the built form are all in one same sentence as far as this project is concerned. Here is a closer look at some of the technical aspects of the project. Look at the solid wooden frames. Look at how the frames are connected between each other, the steel frames, sections, connection details, and look at the outer frame here, wherein this is made to hide what is happening in between. All one can see from the exterior is this. Let us take a look at the interior of the project. Here is what one of the display units looks like. You can see the traditional Kanak display items that are kept over here, and look at the architecture, how beautifully displays the exhibits exactly in place. Light from the bottom, some amount of diffuse light on top makes the building looks really alive. An intelligent passive ventilation system removes the need for air conditioning, making the building's clean natural air supply an experiential part of the center's design. This building does not have air conditioning. Surprising, but yes, the passive ventilation system which the building works on, because these curved spaces are where the hot air escapes outside, and along the horizontal channels the building pulls in fresh air from the nearby Pacific surroundings. With just because the Pacific surrounding is so naturally airy and windy, the circulation system naturally works out because the hot air kind of explodes out and thereby creating a vacuum. The vacuum pulls in the remaining surrounding air, which is cool because of the beach nearby. So, this intelligent system does not require air conditioning, making the building very, very nature friendly. Even the interrelationship between building clusters arranged in a layout similar to that of the Grand Alley plan of traditional Kanak villages, it's dependent on a continuous stream of movement between enclosed and exterior spaces. Earlier in this lecture, we were talking about the Grand Alley plan in which the traditional Kalak village is made up of. There is a Grand Alley, and at the end of the alley is the chieftain's house. On both sides of the alley, they have trees lined up and they have villages and buildings and other villages. The similar layout is followed in this building, and that is what is so famous, and that is something which people can so closely relate to. Take a look at another area of the building. This is, you can see the interior and the exterior of the big circular case that we were talking about. You can see the interior and the exterior in the same picture here. Here, if you see, this is the plan of the building, and you can see the section of the building right below it. A slightly curving axial layout because of the traditional Kanak thing, and this is the Grand Alley which they were talking about, wherein there are trees and buildings on either side. There is a building here, there is a building here, there are buildings spaces on either sides of this Grand Alley. These are those 10 cases which we are talking about, and if you take a section across this line, this is what you see. They had earlier explained about the passive ventilation system in this area, wherein the hot air escapes out of these, and top portion makes sure that the warm air is collected on top of this and it kind of gets out. And when the warm air is out of this building, there is a vacuum which is created here, which tries to pull in the cool air from the exterior, thereby maintaining a continuous circulation of wind in the area. And the wind itself is relatively cool in the area because of a subtropical climate and the presence of the Pacific breeze over here. And look at the way the shape of the tree has influenced the shape of the building here. It's taken a direct representation from it, from the trees surrounding the building, from the chieftain's houses. The form of the building is arrived. The effect is really organic and is very eye-catching. A beautiful incompleteness about the shells elicits seemingly paradoxical perceptions of a work in progress and a work in ruins that is nevertheless deeply satisfying. Idealistically, perhaps these incomplete geometries reflect the sentiment that Kanak culture is continuing to grow and evolve from ancient roots, even as new conditions require it to adapt its form. This is how beautifully this whole building, whole project can be explained. It's organic, it's beautiful. The shell is incomplete because it has to resemble a work in progress, at the same time a work in ruins that is nevertheless deeply satisfying. It is also to be understood as the Kanak culture which is continuing to grow and evolve from the ancient roots, because when something is continuing to grow, it is not complete, it is still incomplete, it is still growing. So, that is what the building idealistically explains. This is a stark comparison between how a traditional Kanak house is built with what Renzo Piano has designed here. Almost the same material with the similar construction technology, just the scale is varied here. Otherwise, it is all very similar technology over here. Yet, for all the contextual sensitivities, inevitable inconsistencies pervade the design, because the fundamental discord between the technological sophistication of the structures and the technical traditional craftsmanship exhibited within them illustrates a conceptual problem that undermines the center's tenuous sense of heritage and identity. It has been said that the center's technology acts as a mediator between conflicting cultural messages, design impulses, systemic objectives, but this is likely only an optimistic reading of an irresolvable and somewhat distracting conflict. They say that there is a conflict between the technological sophisticated building that Piano has designed on one side and the traditional craftsmanship of the local Canucks. Look at the earlier structure. Critics also say that this is local Canuck structure and this is your technically advanced and sophisticated modern building. How do you say this is equal to this, is what some critics claim. This is another place in which the center of the Canucks traditional chieftain's house looks like. There is a central pole which is surrounded by a lot of elements conically placed here, very similar to what Piano had done. While the center's form is abstractly beautiful and environmentally thoughtful, it is unavoidably alien to the local culture of New Caledonia, as are the architects and the building tradition to which they belong. Even the materials from which the shells are made, intended to resemble the natural material palette of the traditional Kanak architecture, sadly were imported to the island for the project. They claim that this beautiful building is completely alien, it is unavoidable because the architecture of New Caledonia and the architect Renzo Piano was so very different, because he comes from a very different building background and New Caledonia has a very completely different building background. And even the building materials which were supposed to resemble local architecture were actually brought in for this project from some other countries, were actually imported. So, that is something which is very sad, because a cultural museum according to some critics must have buildings from their area, because that is only way which they can represent their own tradition and history. Finally, a comparison between the chieftain's house and the building which Piano had designed. Ultimately, these unresolved socio-political issues may be the price of the Bilbo effect, wherein even the greatest and the most celebrated foreign designs cannot completely bridge the gap between the architectural standards of the international competitions and the sense of regional appropriateness so demandingly required by the cultural center. Yet, to say that Renzo Piano's effort at Naumea is admirable would be a brutal understatement, because an example of formal creativity and technological skill, this center is no less than one of the finest and the most advanced projects of our time. This is one of the sketches made by Piano himself. Here you can see where he gets the environmental sensibility issues solved right in the sketch. Based on the learning that we have had so far in this lecture, we should be able to understand the building technology in a culturally sensitive environment, the use of technology in a foreign surround. We should have understood the architectural and structural genius of Pritzker Prize Award winner architect Renzo Piano. With this, you should be able to answer these questions. Explain the Jean Marie Tribau Cultural Center with reference to the brief that the architect had and how the architect had tried to resolve the cultural disparity between Caledonian Kanak architecture and modern architecture. Explain the term Bilbo effect and why is it attributed to Jean Marie Tribau Cultural Center. With this, we come to an end of this lecture, and we also come to an end of units 3 and 4. We wrap units 3 and 4 along with this lecture, and on the next episode we will be looking at the closure of this particular subject, structure and architecture. Looking forward to meet you in the next episode. Thank you.